From my experience, 95% of candidates don't know how to answer common interview questions. That's why they confuse interviewers and fail to get the job. So in this video, I'll explain how to answer common interview questions that you will get for a role of a software project manager. I've collected all these tips and insights from interviewing hundreds of project managers myself. And stay until the end, because I'm going to share lots of valuable resources along the way. They will help you pass interviews with confidence. So let's dive in. The very first question that you will get is, tell me about yourself. It's one of the most critical questions on an interview. So why do recruiters ask this question all the time? It may seem like they want to know a little more about you to make a connection, but in fact they just need a starting point to dig deeper into your experience. They also try to validate whether you are worth the time of the whole interview. So your goal is to quickly prove that you are the right person for the role you apply to. Don't tell them your whole biography starting from elementary school. Instead, you want to have a prepared answer where you quickly jump through your major career points. It looks like this. Your first job. Select the most interesting story that shows your achievements, for example, in project management. Briefly describe the situation, your efforts, and the positive outcome. Then make a transition to the second job and specify why you decided to make this move, or explain how you got your next project. Now select one most interesting story in that time frame. But here you need to focus on another aspect of your work. For example, talk about your leadership experience. Continue to the third job and select a story with another relevant skill set, like working with stakeholders, creating a new product from scratch, or solving a problem. In any case, all these stories should be tailored to the job description. You need to highlight skills and experience that are relevant to the role of a software project manager in the given company. Let me give you an example. I started as a project manager 11 years ago at ABC company. I got a small project to lead with 4 developers. Nevertheless, in a few months, we delivered several minor releases successfully. This way, I gained the trust of clients. As a result, this small team grew from 4 to 16 people within the next half a year. That's when real project management started for me. I had to learn everything on the go. Nevertheless, I was able to lead 3 to 5 projects in parallel. Moreover, there were several products we developed from scratch. So I participated in project and product life cycles from initiation to its release to the market. So during the first 5 years I managed about 14 projects of different complexity and duration. And I have experience with fixed price and times and materials projects. But it was all mobile development. So I thought that to be a great software project manager you need to have experience in web and cloud projects as well. So I've started to look for a new opportunity. That's how I landed in XYZ company. It was a completely different experience, but I've got a big web project for a large organization as I wanted. At this point, I started transitioning from a project manager role into more of delivery manager and program manager. So let me focus on the latest program I've been leading for the last 2 years. So here you need to explain some specifics about product or service you developed. But of course you should be very careful not to violate your non-disclosure agreements. For the same reasons, I'm not going to give these details on YouTube. But it would be best if you prepared a story that describes the following: the problem that your product or service solves, the environment where you work, the architecture of the product from a technical perspective, size of the team and scale of the project or program, main challenges you had to solve. Let's assume I have just described the product we develop on a higher level. So let's get back to the answer where I continue to describe my responsibility. So in this example I had to combine several roles. First, I acted as a Scrum Master for my development team, but likewise I had to manage two vendors in terms of their priorities, timelines, dependencies and risks. I had to align their efforts with our development needs. Additionally, I had to ensure not only the timely delivery of our user stories, but also the reaching of strategic objectives for this initiative. It required close cooperation with several groups of stakeholders. So, for example, we had two groups of product owners that we had to make to work together. Then we had subject matter experts who provided us with the business context of what we were implementing. On top of that, we had to manage the expectations of the executives of this whole product. So I had to align all the requirements from stakeholders with strategic goals and release timelines for the entire product. As you understand, such a program required clear communication and reporting on all levels. But likewise, risk management was a critical part as well. And we can discuss this topic next. But I should say it was the most challenging program I've ever led. Nevertheless, we reached our objectives successfully. Okay, that's all for my introduction. If you have any questions, let's dive deeper into any aspect of this experience. And here's an insider tip for you. If the recruiter asks you something like, okay, now tell me more about your most recent experience, as a follow-up question, it means you failed miserably with your previous storyline. It means you need to dedicate more time to prepare a better answer before you go to the next interview. By the way, I have a video on how to write a perfect CV of a project manager. It will help you get more interviews. I'll leave you a link in the description. The next most common question is, what is a software development lifecycle? So to answer this question correctly, you need to name the main phases of a software project. For example, it might be the initiation, collecting of requirements, creating designs and wireframes, creating the architecture, and then implementing application, testing it, and deployment to the production and the markets. And maybe a hypercare phase for bigger projects. But what's more important, you need to understand what the project team does during these phases. You need to know what kind of work happens in each phase and what the main challenges are. Believe me, interviewers will test your knowledge about how to deal with these challenges. They will ask you situational and behavioral questions right on the spot. By the way, I have a PDF resource called 7 mistakes that software project managers make. If you talk about some of these mistakes while covering this question, it may give you some bonus points. So get the report, the link is in the description. Alright, the next common question is, what is Agile, Scrum or Kanban? I hope you see the catch here, and you should not mix all these three terms together. Agile is an approach to managing something. It's a set of concepts and principles, while Scrum and Kanban are frameworks. Of course, you need to know the specifics of how Scrum and Kanban work in software development projects. For example, you need to know the main prerequisites, ceremonies, meetings, and tools for both of these frameworks. You also need to understand how to implement these frameworks from scratch with a new team. And likewise, you need to know the main challenges that a Scrum Master or a leader in the Kanban framework faces on daily basis. There are no tricks here, you simply need to read and memorize Scrum and Kanban frameworks, that's all. That's why we'll move to a more tricky question, which is, what's the main difference between Scrum and Kanban? Well, from my practical experience, Agile practitioners have different points of view on this question. So an interviewer might want to hear something specific. However, here are my top differences. First of all, Scrum is heavy on prescribed rules, while Kanban doesn't specify any. Second, all events in Scrum are time-boxed, while Kanban doesn't have any prescribed meetings. Scrum is iterative, while Kanban is a continuous flow of work. And third, Kanban has a limit of work in progress items, while Scrum limits the scope of work in iterations and increments. Okay, in any case, I do suggest that you read more information about Scrum and Kanban. Personally, I dedicated a whole module to Agile frameworks in my online course. So believe me, it's super important in the software development industry. The next question usually follows the discussion of Scrum and Kanban. It's how do Agile frameworks work together with project management? In other words, they ask about Agile project management. What you need to know is that you apply Agile frameworks to the execution phases of a project. In essence, you apply Scrum and Kanban to implementation and testing of the software you develop. And then you manage work in other phases with different plan-driven project management approaches. In software development, it usually boils down to tracking tasks and deadlines for those phases. Again, it's a big topic that you need to understand thoroughly. Therefore, I have a full video that describes Agile project management. You know where to find it, don't you? The next question is, do you have any technical skills? There are technical companies like Meta, Google, and some others that require project managers to have coding experience. You'll know about these requirements upfront. In all other cases, the interviewers are not actually interested in your technical skills. They don't want to test you with any practical coding exercise. Instead, they want to know how you will manage engineers and how you can solve technical problems that you don't fully understand. And here you need to explain how good you are at delegating the work and decision making to your software engineers and QAs. Moreover, I do recommend that you point out that you teach your team members how to work with a project manager and project owners. So it includes ground rules in the team on how to provide information. For example, engineers should try to explain complex problems in simple terms and explain business implications, while you convert these decisions and problems into project management aspects like the scope of work, costs, required efforts, and project risks. I believe this question also requires an example. As a project manager, I try not to make technical decisions on my own. I try to use the knowledge and expertise of my team members. So in most cases, I facilitate and organize the technical discussions. For example, I usually start with the business problem that we need to solve. Then we brainstorm technical solutions. If, for example, this solution requires further discussion with product owners, I ask what the business pros and cons are. Are there any related risks, and so on. Nevertheless, I try to stay on top of all these technical matters, at least on a higher level. It means I try to be ready to explain all these complex technical challenges in simple language that clients understand. And I always drive a problem into business implication and business decisions rather than technical. But likewise, it helps sometimes to translate business requirements into technical aspects of our product. This way, development team doesn't waste time deciphering those requirements. I can provide them with the context of the task at hand. And there are just a few cases when I may override the technical decision of the team. For example, when one technical option helps to reach project objectives without gold plating compared with another one, more complicated option. Also, as much as practical, I try to validate all technical decisions with the team before promising something to the clients. Okay, that's my approach to solving technical problems and making technical decisions with the team. So it means you don't work with technical aspects of software engineering. You work with the business and management aspects of a project. With that said, interviewers will test your overall understanding of software engineering process. So the next question may sound like this. What does it take to write code? Here they want to test your understanding of the nature of software engineering. Keep in mind that writing code is a creative process to some extent. First, developers need to analyze the requirements and the existing code. Then they need to do research for a solution or discuss an approach with the team. They may need to discuss the impact of new functionality on the rest of the application. After that, a developer may need to make a quick and dirty check to see whether the solution actually works as expected. Only after that, they will write the final draft of the code, following all the guidelines and recommendations of the programming language. They will also need to cover the new code with unit tests and so on. Also, it's a common practice to do peer review, so another developer will analyze this work. After review, our developer will need to make corrections. And then later, when testing is done, there might be defects they need to fix. So actually typing the code is a tiny part of the process. Analyzing and researching takes the most of the time. So by understanding this whole process, you will not set unrealistic expectations towards the developer. Likewise, you won't promise something to the client that developers cannot deliver. Okay, here's another tech interview question. What is the process of getting the final software product to the market? Interviewers ask these kind of questions to ensure that you understand that the deployment process is a big part of the project. Moreover, depending on the type of software product you develop, there are different ways to get it to the end user. So, for example, for a mobile application, you need to explain what it takes to comply with all requirements of markets like Apple Store and Google Play Market. And likewise, you need to show your understanding of what it takes to deploy a web application to a server and make it work. By the way, do mention the rise of cloud technologies and impact of DevOps efforts. A modern application requires complex infrastructure behind it, and it's a part of your project as well. For sure, you don't need to have in-depth technical knowledge to do it yourself. However, you need to be able to explain that it's an additional work and you need to plan for it. Next, you should be ready for unconventional questions. These type of questions test your knowledge and your ability to solve problems. So you may get a question that seems out of the blue, but you should be ready that this question is important and you need to apply all your project management skills here. I use such questions as well. So, for example, somewhere during the interview I will ask the candidate, do you see that smart TV on the wall? Let's imagine that you are starting a quality assurance project and you need to test the capabilities of this TV to ensure that it works as described in the requirements. Now, the question is, how will you identify the scope of work of this project and how long it will take? And here's the correct trail of thoughts. We test against requirements. We can't collect all the requirements for all features on this smart TV right on the spot. So there must be a catch here. Pause now and think about it. Alright, the easiest and the correct answer is to take the manual, because it has already all the sets of requirements described and structured. Okay, if you guess the correct approach to this question, write me a yes in the comments below. I just want to see how many people are ready for such questions. So, based on this manual, we can assess the scope of work, get the breakdown of features, and then estimate them. But many candidates approach this question without thinking. Many go into denial that this situation is impossible and so on. But remember, we are testing your problem-solving skills combined with knowledge of the development process. And there is a huge variety of such questions. You can't have all the answers in your head. But in general, you should follow the simple process. First, you need to collect more requirements to have full picture of what needs to be done. Ask the right questions. Second, you need to find a practical solution, and usually this solution is either something on the internet or you need to break down a project management approach and follow the basic steps. Soft skills, leadership and motivation are critical for the software development industry. That's why get ready for all sorts of questions like how do you motivate your team members? But first of all, you need to show that you know the main challenges of motivation in the IT industry. You see, you will work with highly educated people with critical thinking. Additionally, good IT experts are in high demand. So, not only they are not afraid of losing their job, but also other companies are actively hunting for them. So if we talk about theory, then you need to work on higher levels of hierarchy of needs as Maslow describes it. It means in IT you can't easily motivate people by promising higher salaries and making a beautiful office. People want challenges, responsibilities, and a productive working environment. Moreover, they crave for a competent manager and leader. So you need to explain how you will tap into the self-esteem of a person and how you will motivate him or her by delegating responsibilities and developing ownership for the results. Again, I've got you covered here. I'll leave you a link to a playlist that explains the main motivational theories in practical and applicable terms. Alright, moving on, and the next question is, what are the main challenges in software projects? Again, in the software development industry, there is a big list of these challenges, so different interviewers will want to hear different things, but I will share several common ones. The first challenge is the communications problem. From one side, customers don't understand how we implement an application. What does it take to write code? On the other hand, it's challenging to translate complex technical problems into simple business options. The additional challenge is that clients don't understand what they really want. Clients don't know the capabilities of the technologies around them. So, once they see the first results, they may change a lot of requirements. The third challenge is that there is always uncertainty on whether we will be able to implement the application within given constraints of time and money. You see, there are no impossible tasks, but estimates may dramatically differ if we need to implement something completely unique from scratch. The next challenge is tricky. You don't want to talk about it like that on an interview. Software development companies have inadequate skill levels of team members. The thing is, nowadays all software projects are urgent. Clients want to get their solutions as soon as possible, and they cost a lot. So when there is a potential client, your boss pushes you to start the project ASAP with resources available today. Otherwise, you may lose the client who will go to your competitors because they have resources on demand. On an interview, you need to show that you have practical skills to deal with all these challenges. Here's the problem. We covered only questions specific to the software development industry, but you need to prepare for general project management and situational questions as well. So you need to click one of these videos and learn how to answer those tricky questions as well. Click one of the videos and I'll talk to you there. Bye bye.